Sports betting is as popular now as it has ever been to the masses, with websites and applications that allow almost anyone, of age of course, to wager their life earnings on the next big event. It's impossible to ignore the amount of money that flows through the industry, at least the legal one. In New York City in the 1940s, sports betting was dominated by illegal bookmaking operations ran by organized crime syndicates. And unfortunately, college basketball was not immune. This is what you don't know about the City College of New York's point shaving scandal. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Blake, and this is Matt.
What's up?
And we are back with another Cheaters episode.
Cheaters never win.
I loved the first Cheaters episode we did about the Summer Olympic Marathon story. That was one of my favorites.
I think it's a popular one in general, yeah.
Seems like it. So maybe this one will be enjoyed. So what we're going to talk about today is CCNY, or the City College of New York's point shaving scandal. Now, did you know much or anything about this? Because it happened so long ago that I was not aware of it until I was just browsing an article recently and I came across it.
This specifically, I was not really aware of. I did know that the 40s and the 50s, especially in college sports, was a time of this kind of thing happening. And I did kind of know that one of the reasons the NIT as a tournament in college basketball took a dive had to do with point shaving and gambling and things like that. But I did not know about this particular scandal and how it all fits together. So I'm interested.
This was apparently really big, and this was the arrest took place in 1951, so quite some time ago, a couple generations ago, actually. But of course, they don't like to talk about it because it puts a stain on the sport, you know. So we don't really like to look back on our negative pasts. We'll just look forward. So a little bit of history, if you're not aware of CCNY, or City College of New York. Their men's basketball team was truly a Division I powerhouse in the 40s and 50s. Well, up until 51 at least. They featured an all-Jewish and African-American roster, which was very indicative of New York City culture at the time, and they were actually the first collegiate team to start two African-American players side by side. Thought that was interesting.
So that's the 1940s first with two African-Americans. Okay. Two starting African-American players. Okay. All right, I get that. I see it.
And there, a little bit later, we'll run across a college basketball main person, if you will, a really important person in college basketball history who is definitely a sign of the times. It'll make more sense when we get there. The head coach of CCNY at the time, Nat Holman, was given the nickname Mr. Basketball because he created what people called the city game. Of course, this originated in New York City, but it involved a lot of passing, a lot of ball movement, a lot of fast-paced basketball to create open shots, which is really indicative of what we watch today in college basketball. It's kind of common knowledge that you push the ball up the floor, unless you're Virginia. You push the ball up the floor really fast all the time, looking for shots. Like Carolina is really big about this, pushing the ball, creating turnovers, and just running, getting out and running. And the ball movement, the passing, really started here. And I was not aware of that either, but Nat Holman appeared to be the pioneer of this sort of this era of basketball, if you will, that we still see today.
Yeah, a lot of innovations come out of New York City in terms of basketball because it's played so much and there are so many people there. in the city. So it just you get a lot of things happening at once, but a lot of innovations come from there. So it makes sense that this is an innovation, and it also makes sense. This is still the 40s, so I mean we're still innovating in basketball now. The way we play with 3-point shots and layups, taking being the primary focus of everything. So it's cool. Basketball is still a young game, and 1940 is not that long ago, but it makes sense to me that this all lines up. The other thing is I want to bring back the name Nat. I think it's cool. Nat King Cole, Nat Holman, just Nat. Not like the little pesky bug, just N-A-T. It's a fun name.
And it's not short for Nathan, to my knowledge. It's just Nat.
It's just Nat. Yeah, we're bringing back all kinds of ridiculous old school names. I am here to stand for the name Nat.
Everyone,
let's get that as a thing.
Yes, write that down. Put in your odds. Put your money on the table today. We'll see. So, the story kind of starts in the 40s, but this specific instance, this incident starts in the summer of 1949 in what's known as the Catskills. Now, I had never heard of the Catskills. Of course, I've lived in North Carolina my entire life, and I just wasn't aware that this area was a thing. But apparently, the Catskills are a region in New York State of the Appalachian Mountains based around the Catskill Forest Preserve. Of course, my wife, when I was talking about this with her, I was like, have you ever heard of the Catskills? She's from Northeast. You ever heard of the Catskills? Oh, yeah, it's beautiful up there. I was like, yeah, of course you know about all this. So anyway, that made me feel smart. Continuing, college players from New York City would be recruited to the Catskills, and I use recruited in air quotes. They were recruited to the Catskills to, quote unquote, work at the different hotels and resorts in the area. And once they got there, the hotels and the resorts would assemble basketball teams and compete against each other, kind of like Summer League. And because they couldn't get paid by the hotels to play basketball, they were paid to work. They were paid as bellhops, bag boys, bus boys, etc., whatever job they needed to fill on their books or whatever. They would pay these basketball players to come up there in the summertime and actually play against each other. I think that's crazy. And apparently this was the same time when Wilt Chamberlain would have been there.
So that actually is interesting. So they're just, I'm assuming these hotels, that they're playing games against each other, right? The hotel, one hotel versus another hotel.
That's what it seems like.
That's kind of entertainment, summer entertainment. I did also know this, that people in the 40s and 50s, particularly in New York City, would travel out. If you had some cash, you would spend your summer out in the mountains. So I guess that's entertainment for them and bragging rights for your hotel. Not much different than college athletics, right? I mean,
exactly.
You're ostensibly a student at the school, and a lot of them actually are, but you're there because the school wants you to play basketball or wants you to play football or whatever else. And you're there to make money for the school by people showing up to watch you. So it's not much different than that. And and they're being paid. Good on them for getting around the rules by not getting around the rules. Like, they're being paid for bellhops, bag boys, bus boys. It's interesting. It's interesting. Come be a chef, but your hours are just 7 to 9.
1 day a week.
Yeah, that's all it is. Coincidentally, you're cooking on the basketball floor. So
yeah, I actually don't. Well, that is a term that probably wasn't used in the 40s, but I actually don't know. I would love to find that out. Did they actually work as bellhops, or were they just on the book as a bellhop and they just practiced and played all day, every day? I actually don't know. I didn't see anything about that. I'm assuming they actually worked a little bit, but I don't know.
It's probably a thing where if you go out and you put up 30 and grab 15 rebounds, you probably didn't work for anything. If you went out and turned the ball over 15 times, you might have pulled a couple of shifts.
You were reporting to work the next day. That's for sure. So,
if you ain't gonna earn your money on the floor, you better come move some bags.
So and that leads to the next point, in that this whole idea of point shaving, right? This happened in the Catskills in the summertime. These players were playing for wealthy vacationers and tourists and mobsters and organized crime people from the city. They'd come up there and they'd vacation in the summertime. So they were playing in front of these fairly wealthy people. And of course, what do wealthy people do with their money? They gamble with it. We all know, not a surprise. So what would happen started off a little innocent. So what would happen is, say, a chef at one hotel would bet with his former employees on the final score of a game. And then that chef would get a player to potentially shave the points off of the final score to help him win his bet or her win his bet. And say if the players kept the final score to a certain point, so say they won by 8 instead of 25, the chef would agree to make the players lobster and steak all week for free. It's a pretty good deal if you're the player, right? And it's not, it's like the little under the table, $5 here and there, and then the chef would just use the hotel's food and give the players what they were promised. So pretty innocent, I would say.
Yeah, and it's not like these games mattered. It's not like these games mattered. It's not something that's going to hit the newspapers. It's not something that people are interested in. So it maybe matters to these people in the Catskills. They may be betting on it and being in the game that way. But for these players, it's like this isn't their main gig. They're just here to goof off in the summertime. So I don't. Certainly not the most honest thing in the history of the world, but
we're not Abe Lincoln territory, but we're not quite to Nixon either. So
yeah,
this all started to get really interesting when a player named Eddie Gard, who played for Long Island University, met up with one of these petty criminal crime syndicate type people from the city named Salvatore Sollazzo. Met up with him at the Catskills. Not sure exactly how they met, but they eventually began fixing games at the Catskills for money instead of food. So this is when the money aspect, the organized crime syndicate aspect started showing up, where Sollazzo would bet with other tourists and vacationers and stuff. And then, of course, Eddie Gard, playing for one of the two teams, would make sure that Sollazzo won his bet, and then he would make some cash on the side for it. Still, the only people that are being harmed are the other tourists, vacationers, petty criminals who are betting on the game. So again, not terrible, but this is where the money aspect started to come in.
Yeah, and like you said, it's still obviously now at this point they're gambling on it, and so it's become an illegal thing. But like you said, where's the harmed person, right? Like, so where is the harm? No harm, a lot of times you could say no crime, right? There's nobody that's actually been hurt by the action.
There's no victim.
There's no victim. Why are we upset? But foreshadowing, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump from putting a little side money on something you're doing with your friends to actual gambling. So
this is where it gets fun. The following basketball season, the 1949-1950 season, is apparently when the first game was fixed by Gard and Sollazzo. They put a date on it, which is impressive, because I'm assuming this date came from like the prosecutor at the time, who we'll get to in a few minutes. It was January 17th, 1950. LIU was playing NC State. Go figure.
Go Pack.
That's real.
Pack.
So apparently that's the first game on record where a game was dumped and sold by a Gard and Sollazzo. And Gard apparently made $1,000 for fixing that game alone. That's wild.
He's getting a cut of whatever the overall is. Is that
whatever
idea?
Sollazzo? Yeah, I mean Sollazzo. They're betting thousands of dollars, and I would assume that Sollazzo made enough money, and Gard made him enough money by fixing the game that Sollazzo would just cut him $1,000 on the side, and Sollazzo keep the rest. I mean, because he's acting as a bookmaker at this point, a bookie at this point. So, I mean, he made plenty. So he can probably stand, and this is 1950, remember, he can still stand to give a college basketball player $1,000 for fixing a game. That's wild. So moving ahead to one of Gard's teammates at the time, Sherman White, who was the star player at LIU at the time. Gard convinced Sherman White and two other starters on the team to get in on these deals. So that's kind of how it started, coming to New York City, right? So that's how this point shaving aspect from the Catskills came down here. And this is when it's obviously serious now. So back to CCNY, right? They finished their regular season that year 17-5, the best record among all the New York City schools. And this earns them a bid to the NIT because they were the conference champions. Their first round game in this tournament was against the University of San Francisco, who were the defending NIT champs, by the way. They beat them by 19, 65-46 in round one. That is not a bad win. So like the former national champions, NIT champions, lost to this team in the first round. Again, not calling out Virginia or anything, but here we go.
Don't let this all distract you from the fact that Virginia lost to number 16, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, for the first time. I think this is interesting. I think that the fact that they won this game and what we're getting ready to get into with this tournament, I find this interesting because a lot of people assume that a gambling scandal and point shaving would be you losing the game on purpose. And it doesn't have to be. It can be, hey, we think you're going to win by 20 and you're probably actually going to win by 40. But if you want to bring that on down to below 20, because that's where the line is, if you want to bring that on down, or there's no doubt in my mind that you guys can go out and score 100, but the over is only 95 points for this game. So we need you to keep the score down. You can still win. I don't care, but I need you to keep the score down. I mean, so it's not about necessarily losing on purpose, but it is about not giving your everything to it. And I think that win, that like they won by 19 and it was still part of the scandal, is that's intriguing to me.
Right. So and so they won by 19 because before the game, a player for CCNY at the time, Norm Major, who was a senior, he was approached by some folks, some of these organized crime syndicate folks. He was offered $2,000 cash per tournament game to shave points off the spread. Being a good teammate, a good team player, he approached the other starters on his team about the offer, who told him, no, we're not doing that. We're doing this right. We've made it this far. We're not doing that. We cannot risk doing that. So maybe if they had taken the money, they only win by 8. But because there was in theory, this is just what's documented. In theory, if there was money on the game, they would have won by less. So
right.
That just goes, the final score winning by 19 just goes to show that there probably wasn't money on the game, because that would be a heck of a spread against the defending champs like that. No one would have won money on that, right?
You think the point spread was closer than 19 on that one?
I would hope so, or I would find a new bookie. So the second round, CCNY defeats Kentucky, who is, of course, a blue blood in college basketball. They defeat Kentucky in round 2 by 39 points. 39. That's is against karma. Adolph Rupp's Kentucky team. Okay. So a little background on what happened before this game, right? So Holman, CCNY's coach, instructed his players to extend their hands to shake Kentucky's before the game, and Kentucky refused. At this point, Kentucky was still an all-white basketball team, and so they probably assumed that they were too high and mighty to shake the other team's hand, coming from New York City, having the backgrounds that they did. And at this point, of course, Kentucky never had a black player on their team. But more interestingly, Adolph Rupp told a group of reporters just a few years prior to this game that the Lord didn't want, quote, a white boy to play against a colored boy, else he wouldn't have painted them different colors, end quote. That goes to show you the time and the mindset of Rupp and Kentucky basketball.
Adolph Rupp's parents had divine inspiration, apparently, when they named him, because Adolph wasn't a terrible pick for his mindset. Notorious racist, great basketball coach. Can't take that away. Achieved a lot, but also just, notoriously racist. And I guess it could be a product of the time, but it's also a choice. It's also a choice.
Absolutely. So after that beating, CCNY goes on to defeat Duquesne. I never know.
Duquesne.
No way. That
Duquesne.
is
Yeah,
not
no.
Duquesne.
Everybody. If you're sitting at home and you've not seen this school spelled before, it does not at all look like Duquesne, but it is in fact Duquesne. Duquesne.
That is not.
And the whole middle syllable is just not pronounced. It's Duquesne.
Yeah. CCNY defeats this team in the semifinals, 62-52, and then goes on to defeat Bradley University in the finals by 8, 69-61. CCNY also wins the NCAA tournament because they were separate and apart. You could play in both at the time. They defeated Bradley University in the final of the NCAA tournament, oddly enough. So they were the champions of both of these postseason tournaments, which obviously has not been done since. And I'm not aware of a time where it happened before that.
Yeah, it was possible to compete in both tournaments because they were both kind of postseason tournaments, and this was the time that the NCAA tournament was trying to kind of assert its authority and take control of the tournament and have their tournament be recognized as a national champion. They always did. The NCAA would say the winner of our tournament is the NCAA champion, but you need the newspapers and media to recognize that as well, and they hadn't got that by this point. So you had teams that would pick one or the other. Sometimes, obviously, CCNY played in both and won both. But many teams looked at the NIT, which was always held in Madison Square Garden, as the bigger event because it's Madison Square Garden. So that's just another interesting little nugget to the story in the time period that this was very much like college football now, where the NCAA didn't actually have full control over the goings on in terms of championships.
Another interesting point about CCNY at the time, they were so good and attracted so many players that they played home basketball games in MSG. They would attract more fans to MSG than the Knicks would. So that's kind of why there's more than one reason, but that's kind of why these bookies would lean towards influencing college basketball games. And of course, college kids are just so influential. Like their brains just aren't developed yet. So they're just so influential. And of course, like maybe a player comes from nothing, and then all they have to do is win a game by 8 points instead of 20, and you give me $1,000. That's a no-brainer in most people's eyes, right? So there's a lot of things go into why this happened, but I think that's a big one, is the influentiality. Is that a word? The ability to influence college kids, 18 to 22 years old, by these people are just insane.
And still that's some of the college recruiting scandals that we see. A lot of times it is the same situation. If you're 18 years old, if I'm 33 years old, and somebody's saying if I go work at this place, they're going to give me X, Y, and Z, whether it's money and stuff or whatever, just like you said, I might take that, whether it's against the rules or not, because it's not other than this weird fraud case that the FBI's got some of the college programs up on now. It's not illegal. It's just against the rules. So I can see plenty of people in that position taking the offer. Obviously, that's different than gambling, right? But still speaks to the same point. You're 18 years old, and somebody asks you to do something simple for a lot of money. Some people aren't going to turn that down.
Nope. By this time, there's a new DA, a new district attorney in town in New York City. Brooklyn DA Miles McDonald shows up, and he begins to investigate police corruption and gambling in the city. Don't know if he knew that college basketball was involved at this point, but at a minimum, he knew that bookies were paying police and politicians so that the bookies weren't being arrested for what they were doing. I think that was common knowledge. Just not sure he knew at the time how big it was in college basketball. So DA McDonald, over time, this is happening. Like, I think it's happening the off season, towards the end of the season, 1950s, going into the 50-51 season. So by this time, apparently he knew he couldn't trust seasoned officers, because of the corruption issues that he was having. So he recruited 29 rookie cops to go undercover and pose as students at different New York City schools, CCNY, LIU, Manhattan University, I think, and probably others. But through this technique, I guess, of sending these rookie cops to pose as students, he learned of a bookmaker known as Mr. G. And for a while, that's the only way that he could identify him was Mr. G. And apparently, Mr. G and his crime syndicate took in $20 million in sports bets per year. And Mr. G was directly paying police and politicians for bribes. $20 million in 1950. Not bad money, right?
$20 million in 1950 would be the equivalent of $217 million today.
So over 10 times.
Million.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's a good living, I would say.
$217 million. That's, wow. That's a ton of money.
That's pretty good money.
So that's not profit. But if they're working it right in the way they're supposed to be, they should be making, if they take in 217, they're supposed to give out not quite all of that. So they're probably making that 20 million plus per year in our money, which probably is
easy money. Yeah.
Still a sizable living.
So as he goes on through this investigation, D.A. McDonald identifies Mr. G as a gentleman by the name of Harry Gross. I think the last name fits, don't you say? Even with this identification, though, McDonald couldn't connect the bookmakers to the players. That was the problem. Until January 1951. So the following season after CCNY has won the NIT and the NCAA championships, two former Manhattan College players approached a then Manhattan College player, Junius Kellogg, about shaving points for money. So these two former players who very likely were involved as players are now not players anymore, but they are helping to facilitate this through their old connections at their old school. So they approached Kellogg, who is a junior, I believe, at the time, like a standout junior for Manhattan. The two former players approached Kellogg and asked him about shaving points for money. He told the two, Burns and Pop, he told them no. They advised him to reconsider, though, and that was probably a threat, and to meet back up with him just a few days later to figure out what his final answer was. Kellogg got probably a little worried, scared even. He went to his head coach, Ken Norton, who informed the college's president, who suggested going to the police. Now, at this point, I believe it was where Kellogg eventually would wear a wire to these meetings with the two former players, Pop and Burns. He was taken by Pop to a bar off campus, and he went along with the plan. He decided to say, hey, cooperate with the police. I'm going to take your money. I'm going to take your bet. I'm going to take you up on your offer. And he went along with the plan to win the next game by less than 10 points. That was the line. The next game was January 16th against DePaul. He successfully won the game by less than 10 points. He and his teammates did. So after the game, Kellogg rushes back to the bar to meet Pop, but Pop didn't show. Ooh. Now, of course, investigators were on to Pop because they were in on the whole thing, and Pop and Burns were arrested at their homes later that night. And that's how it kind of started.
We do see, this seems like a crime movie, though. I mean, like, this would be, you could turn this into a nice little thriller, because it's got all the recipe, right? Like the dirty cops, and we can't trust them, so we got to go outside the box to get them, and we've got this weird, can't quite figure out who he is, crime lord Mr. G, and then we even get like the goofy sidekicks here in Pop and Burns, who like make the deal and then don't follow through with it. You have to assume they figured out they were being watched and just decided not to show up, because if we don't give the kid the money, then we haven't really done anything wrong. They can't get us, right? And just completely missing the bigger picture on themselves. So that part of it is cool. It's going to be our first Widcast blockbuster. We're just going to get the money together.
Yeah, crowdfunding If anyone has any spare change, let us know. Uh, we can even act. We'll direct. We'll edit everything. We can figure this out.
Yeah, obviously, for a 1950s crime drama, we have to move the setting to Los Angeles. But other than that, this is ready made. We're ready to go.
Now, remember that this game that was quote unquote fixed by Kellogg was on January 16th. January 17th was the morning that Pop and Burns were found and arrested, right? So Pop probably got freaked and ran, didn't show up, thought he might not have been in trouble. Well, too bad. And they were arrested the morning of the 17th. So also on January 17th, 1951, those 2 plus 3 bookmakers and convicted felons were arrested in relation to this case. Now, to my knowledge, to my research, that was the last arrest for about a month. It was not until February 18th, 1951, until the DA's office detectives arrested 3 members of the City College of New York team. 3 members. So the story goes, they take a subway to another part of the city to play a team. They get back on the subway, come home. The detectives are standing on the landing at the subway station and arrest 3 of them on the spot. Also arrested that night were Eddie Gard, our friend from LIU and the Catskills, and Mr. Salazzo. 2 days later, February 20th, Sherman White of LIU was arrested, just 1 day after being named the Sporting News' Player of the Year.
Ooh,
that's tough. That's
highs
really
and
tough.
lows.
Yeah. Talk about falling off a cliff. In total, though, 32 were arrested. 32 people were arrested, and players from 7 different schools were part of that 32. So that shows you how widespread this had gotten. And it had only been about a year since the first documented case in January of 1950. So, I mean, a lot of money exchanged hands at that time, but it's actually not that long to investigate something like this.
Not at all. I mean, that moved really quickly.
Some punishments, though. Mr. G, Harry Gross, he pled guilty to 66 counts of gambling and bribery, and he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The City College of New York was banned forever from playing in Madison Square Garden, and they were dropped from Division I basketball all the way to Division III. That's a pretty tough sentence. But last one, Sherman White, our LIU Player of the Year, he was only 77 points away from setting the NCAA season scoring record at the time. So 77 points away, and his arrest took place on February 20th. I'm not sure of the time frame of postseason tournaments, like what dates they were played. Of course, like the Final Four goes now through April, but definitely made it sound like he was very close and well able to break that record if he was not arrested.
Yeah, big punishments for big crimes, I guess. And like you said, everything moved quickly in this investigation, and the punishments. Yeah, it's weird. So Gross is going to plead guilty for gambling and bribery. It's 8 years of prison. I would actually assume that the bribery part of the charges brought more punishment than the gambling part of the charges. And obviously he was in real jail where Sherman White was not. But, you know, it's a lot like penalties now. The penalties to the institution hurt more. Like Gross got out of jail and probably went back to somewhat of the life he was leading before. City College of New York, and until we put it in the description, CCNY, I guarantee that most of our listeners are going to look at the abbreviation and be like, what is CCNY?
Exactly.
That's not a thing. So, you know, just completely blown up this, what at the time was like an empire in college basketball, just gone.
Yeah. This is
point shaving.
This is a really big issue. And there have been smaller point shaving scandals along the way. Like Boston College was involved in the 70s, 80s. And there were some in between.
Yeah, there's one about a decade after this that actually, it's interesting that NC State is involved in this one, or at least was the game, right? Not involved, I hope.
Quote unquote.
But but at one time they hosted a tournament called the Dixie Classic, and it was essentially the four big North Carolina schools playing four other schools, kind of in a round robin situation. And big deal on the college basketball calendar. It got shut down because of point shaving and money funneling into it. And it was like 25 different schools that were involved in the process. So, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Tim Donaghy's an NBA ref getting involved in gambling stuff. And yeah. So this isn't not over by any stretch. But certainly a big deal.
Yeah, this certainly rocked the college basketball world at the time. And it's amazing, again, it's amazing that something could go from so harmless, like we're playing for steak, man. We're not talking about, this ain't a game. We talking about practice, bro.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
This is a playground fun thing. Yeah,
that's what it feels like. Like it started so innocently, right? Like let's just play for some filet, and now all of a sudden we're getting offered $2,000 a tournament game to shave points, not to lose on purpose, not to even bet on your own games as a college kid. Like literally just win by a certain threshold and don't cross that threshold. Now, I did read about a few times where there were some incidences where the kids would, the kids will be kids. They would try to only win by a certain amount. And of course, not the entire teams were in on this. So there would be a few players on the squad that might not know. So like at one point, I don't remember the exact example, but dude came off the bench and made like 8 straight shots. And I think they ended up losing the game, or they won by too much or something like that. So like they did lose a little bit of money. Like this isn't a perfect case scenario where nothing can go wrong. Like they did lose some games, and they probably, the guys probably lost some money, but in the end, like everybody was wealthier because of this.
Yeah. It's never as simple as it sounds, because it's still sports and anything can happen. The most famous gambling example in sports is the Black Sox scandal. And they, it was still a 5-3 finish in the World Series, right? So they still won 3 games in that series. It's not as simple as just we're gonna do this and it's gonna be okay. And it is. I think we keep saying, it's just point shaving. It's not losing on purpose, but just as easy as it is to get from, it's kind of that slippery slope thing, which is a logical fallacy, except when it plays out, right? Like it went quickly from we're playing games for some stakes to we're going to win by just the right amount. It's not much further before we start saying, but if you lose, maybe you get a bigger cut, and it's the one thing that worries me about the clear path we're on to like legal sports gambling everywhere. Like FS1 and ESPN both have gambling shows as part of their daily rotations. You can find the lines anywhere. We've got sports books. DraftKings is not just daily fantasy anymore. It's a sports book if you're in the right state. And it's that age old question of, is it better to have something outlawed and it happened in the shadows and kind of behind closed doors with pseudonyms, and we got to investigate it for years before we can sniff it out? Or is it better to have it out in the open where we can see everything that's going on? I don't know. I just know that there are foreign countries where basketball is played and the bookies are going up and down the aisles making bets in game.
Yeah.
And I don't know how far. It's like a stone's throw from some things that we don't want to have happen in sports. And so I'm kind of like, I'm in between whether that should be a thing we should be embracing or not, just from a competitive standpoint. Like what could happen? You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
It is a little scary because, like you said, it doesn't seem like it took them such a short amount of time to go from innocent small dollar bets to these players making serious money in college. And then the farther it goes, of course, crime syndicates aren't just white collar criminals. So like at what point are the college basketball players in danger for their lives for not, like the money's just going to keep growing, right? These bets are just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, someone's life could have been at stake. It may have been at stake at some point and we not know. I didn't find anything about any violence going on around this thing. It was, but it's scary to think about what this could have been. It really is. And with all the legalization of sports gambling, and this argument could be made for many different topics, but just the legalization of something doesn't make it right. It's in some instances it just seems like we're tired of fighting it, so let's just regulate it, right? And in some cases that's okay.
Yeah, and I'm not here to rag on the gamblers that may be listening to the podcast. Like, that's not the goal. My only worry is, when the players start getting involved, how do we make sure that doesn't happen? Because as soon as a player, I don't care if they're Pete Rose and they're saying every bet they ever made is on my team. I bet on my team. As soon as a player, a coach, an official gets involved on any side of a bet, we've got an issue in terms of the credibility of the game. So, that's my only concern, is that a player knows that somebody's got, the line for me to get my tonight. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. The line for me is 20.5 points tonight, and I know my friend bet on me to go over, so I'm going to do whatever I can to get mine and get 21. That's a motivation that I don't think should exist. So that's the only part of it is how do we keep the players out of it? Yeah, because that's what happened here, right? The players got involved, and now we question the credibility of the results of the competition, which is ultimately why we all watch sports, is for the competition and the entertainment.
That's what I was going to say, was the keeping the competition on the court, on the field, on wherever the event is played, is, to me, of the utmost importance. We don't want money to dictate the outcome of games. Like, man, sports economics, we could do a freaking series on how money wins games in professional sports, or college sports even, for that matter. But just in this case in general, just like the betting part, you don't want the outcomes of the games to be decided based on who bet on what, right? That's just a really scary road to go down, and I don't even want to think about it, to be honest. Like, that's it. But again, it doesn't seem that far away from where we are.
And even if you're a gambler, you want that. Even if you're a gambler, you want the competitive results to be true. You don't want to get beat by somebody cheating. And that's when bad stuff does start to happen, is when, you get, and we see that in the corporate world where things are legal today, is when somebody, in gambling, they call it a bad beat. We know in the corporate world, when people get bad beats, they start throwing lawsuits, and then we get corporate espionage, and we start getting some shady things happen. That's going to happen, in gambling too. And I don't think we're ready for that part.
No, he wasn't ready. So
that's a good story, though. That was really, a good story. I like
really that. Interesting story. Yeah. And there are plenty of these point shaving scandals out there, but it seemed like on the cheaters list that we have for potential episodes, and especially the time in the college postseason conference national championship era time, that this one was pretty appropriate because of when this instance actually took place relative to a season. So I thought it was really interesting. I loved researching it. Any final thoughts from you about anything? Like, are you happy with the way that this turned out ultimately?
Yeah, I think the notion of cheating and cheating in general is something we all, as sports fans and even non-sports fans, it's something that's just an interesting thing to listen to. They're good stories. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. One day we'll do the Astros. I know we got people out there that really want to do the Astros cheating scandal. We got to keep y'all ready for that one, though. So one day we'll get there.
I feel like it's pretty fresh, right?
Yeah.
It's still so widely covered, but there's still so much about it that I'm sure I don't know, and there's going to be updates over time and stuff. So that's certainly something that I would be interested in talking about here too. But yeah, we got a ton of ideas. If you have any ideas out there, please let us know. Social media, we have an email address if you weren't aware. Just hook us up with some of your ideas and stuff. We're listening. We have had some suggestions and they are on the list. We are working to get as much content out there for you guys. Some new stuff coming out soon, hopefully, whenever we can find time. And because of course we're not professional podcasters, so
I was gonna say unless Bill Simmons wants to hire us.
Oh yeah, professionals. Apologies for that, but until next time, hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Sports betting is as hold on. Sports betting.
It's a tongue twister. Is as accessible.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good rap line.
That does make sense. That does make sense though. Okay, never mind.
Oh, it does. It does. Yeah. You just, yeah, those consonants. You got those consonants coming right quick.
There's lots of S's and C's. I don't know if I can do this. One more time. Sports betting is as accessible now. It is as I gotta reword that.
Sports betting oh man, that is hard to do. Sports betting is as accessible now as it has ever been. That's a lot of S's. All right.
To the masses.